Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial on Language Paper 2, Question 5. We will be using the November 2019 paper, which is writing an article. For this tutorial, I highly recommend taking some notes as we go, so please make sure you are prepared to do that now. As we go through, please make sure that you pause as and when you need to so that you can take those notes, or indeed if you need a break from my voice. So for the Language Paper 2 Question 5 article writing, we will be dealing with the topic of animals in captivity. For any Question 5 in Paper 2, it's really important that you have your own opinions, because if you try to have opinions that are not your own, you may find it difficult to write enough for it. So really have an opinion. So we are looking at how you feel about keeping animals in captivity. Now, I've simplified this into a scale of where I think most people fit. So just try and find the one that sits the closest to how you feel. I think at one end, there are people who believe all animals should be free. And at the other end of that scale, I think that there are people who see animals as inferior to us. So we can do what we like with them because we are the superior species. They're different to us. Maybe you are one of these people. However, you might be a little bit more like myself in the middle. So I've selected 3 different opinions here. Animals are who are meant for the wild should be free. Normal pets like cats and dogs are okay though. So maybe you feel that wild animals, there's a category for which animals should be free and which animals shouldn't. Maybe you believe that only endangered animals should be kept in captivity because captivity helps to protect their species, but any other animals outside of the endangered list should not be kept in captivity. Or maybe you believe that keeping any animal in captivity is fine as long as they are looked after properly. So take a moment now to consider which one is closest to your opinion, or indeed, if you have your own opinion, write that down now. So looking at the November 2019 question, it says, people protest about the cruelty of keeping animals in captivity, but they seem happy enough to eat meat, keep pets and visit zoos. All animals should be free. So you can see that I took my inspiration from that last line of the statement. The question asks for you to write an article for a magazine in which you explain your point of view on this statement. So we will get to the planning of and picking apart of this statement. But first of all, let's just think about writing an article generally. One of the things for Question 5 that is really important is the formality of your language. The formality that it requires you to write in is probably not something you even think about in your day-to-day conversations because it's a really simple and subtle shift in your language. So we're going to do a little activity now where I will give you 3 sentences and I will ask you to try and upscale some of the language in them. So sentence 1, eating less junk food will cut down the amount of sugar you eat. Sentence 2, people shouldn't have to put up with public smoking. Sentence 3, most pupils feel huge pressure to do well. Take some time now to pause the video, write these sentences down, and then see which of the underlined words you could upscale. So here's my attempt. Let's see if we matched in any way. So for sentence 1, I said eating less junk food will reduce the amount of sugar you eat. For sentence 2, people shouldn't have to tolerate public smoking. And for sentence 3, most pupils feel huge pressure to succeed. There's nothing massively impressive about the words that I have substituted. However, what they do is just shift from an informal tone to a formal tone. And this is something that everybody could do if you just take the time to read through your work and make these little improvements. They really do make a difference. So looking generally at successful argument and persuasion, these are the two skills required of you for question 5. Something that I think gets confused a little is that people put a lot of their effort into argumentative language when actually it's persuasive language that you need and an argumentative structure. If your structure is argumentative, it is clear and it flows really well. So make sure you have this really obvious and clear and confident introduction to the topic that you are discussing, not the argument itself, but the topic that it's in relation to. Have a clear flow between paragraphs. So don't have this disjointed idea of things not following on from each other. Have 3 different points if you can to support that argument. When we only have really one line of argument and one thing to say, we end up being quite repetitive. So really think about the different points you could bring in to help you argue. And always end with some kind of summary of your final thoughts and opinions. Even better is to make it cyclical and link your ending to your opening in some way. As I said, the persuasion comes from the way you use your language. It's techniques such as emotive language, evocative language, thinking really carefully about the adjectives, verbs, and adverbs that you're using and how they are intended to make your reader feel. If you want to make them feel guilty, how can you do that with your words? Use imperatives. Be commanding in the way you speak. Again, not aggressive, just commanding and instructional. Use hyperbole. Create a situation or a scenario that seems unimaginable for your reader to really help get your point across. Triple lists used by many MPs to persuade us to listen to them. They really do work to reinforce a point or a feeling. Simply, connectives can help with persuading because, again, it helps the argument to flow. It becomes a much more persuasive argument when it's easy to follow. And use that formal voice. Yes, you are 15 and 16 years old and you don't normally, I imagine, use a formal voice, but imagine yourself as your adult self. Give yourself experience. You want to write as the father of 3 or the woman who made her first million as a CEO. Write as that person. That's okay. Write as an adult that you know well and try to mimic their voice and the way that they would convey the argument. It's about writing as if you have experience. The second that you write as a secondary school student, you limit yourself in your world experience and the weight of your argument. So really consider that formal voice. So going back to then our question 5 from the November 2019 paper, AQA are really great with these statements because not only does it tell us what they want from an argument point of view, but it also gives us avenues that we can go down. So for example, in this statement, you can see that our main argument is all animals should be free. The entire article that you will write will either agree or disagree with this statement, this part of it. If all it needed was this part of the statement, why include the rest? Well, this is where they help us out, because the rest of this becomes the different avenues that we could discuss to help support our opinion. And when you look at this one specifically, it breaks it down into 3. We have people protesting about keeping animals in captivity being hypocrites, eating meat, and keeping pets and visiting zoos. These are different things that you could discuss to then help with your overall argument. So then you need to think about, from a planning point of view, how do you order your points? And it's completely up to you the way you do this, but it needs to have a nice flow to it. So I always advise beginning your plan with a really clear statement of what you believe. So this is obviously personal to me. So my statement, my argument is that wild animals should be free. So I'm not against pets, but I am against wild animals being kept in captivity. So that's going to be the stem of my argument. And now I need to think how I'm going to reinforce that. So I'm going to talk about the fact that zoos are not good places. So point 1 for me will be all about zoos. Point 2, I'm actually going to talk about the dairy and meat industry and how it's ruining the earth. Only because, again, personal experience, I know a bit about this, so I know that I could talk about how keeping farm animals locked up is actually not good for the earth. And I hope that that will be quite persuasive. My third point is going to talk about pets and the benefit of having pets, that there's more of an an equal relationship between pets and owners than there is with animals in captivity. And then I'm going to finish on quite a poignant point that animals do not have a voice, and therefore we are the ones that should be having that voice for them, and what are we doing with that voice? And then I will aim to link my end to my opening. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk you through how you expand one of these points. So I've taken zoos are not good places. And like I said, you're always trying to think of as many things about that as you can so that you don't end up repeating yourself. I could write this in one sentence: we shouldn't keep animals in captivity because zoos are not good places. That doesn't really give me much to go on. So I need to think about why they're not good places and how I could talk about them. So here is how I broke this down. If, like me, you have become slightly obsessed with Tiger King on Netflix, this is a documentary about a man who keeps tigers and other animals. If you haven't watched it, I do recommend it. I feel like it's really relevant to this idea of zoos and places where people visit. So that will be something that I will talk about to reinforce my point. And the second thing I'm going to do is talk about a personal visit to a zoo and why that proved to me that zoos are not good places. So then what I do with my 2 sub-points, I break them down even further. How much can I talk? You're always trying to say a lot about a little. So Tiger King. I'm going to talk about the fact that in Tiger King, what we learn is that humans are only interested in financial gain. I'm going to talk about the fact that zoos are there for profit and entertainment and not actually about the animals themselves. I reckon I can talk about that for at least 3 to 5 sentences, so that's really good. The fact that in zoos, animals die unnaturally and they're also born in unnatural situations. So what we see in this documentary is animals being killed when they don't serve the right purpose anymore. But also, even in a good zoo and not a zoo like Tiger King, we have animals that are fed from bottles by humans, and it's really unnatural and doesn't seem right. And treating animals as beneath us is not right either. This idea that there's a real lack of equality, it's nowhere near. These animals in the show are beaten and made to do things that they wouldn't naturally do. And I think that's the kind of point that I will be making. So all of these points go towards showing and proving that zoos are not good places, which go towards showing that wild animals should be free, which is my argument. Next is my personal visit to a zoo. An anecdote is sometimes a really good way to discuss a topic because you can give personal opinion. Just make sure you maintain that formal voice when you do so. So one of the things I experienced was how cramped the space is compared to the natural environment. I was quite unnerved to see how little space these big cats had to roam around in, and I don't think they did much roaming at all. So that's something I'll talk about. The fact that the animals were reliant on humans for everything, so then they weren't learning the key skills to survive. And one of the things that worries me is that some zoos do release animals back into the wild. And I think that that's such a risky thing to do when they've become so familiar with human contact. And one of the things that really worries me, I suppose, is that there's a lack of specialists in zoos. So if you haven't always studied tigers, for example, or big cats, how do you understand how to properly care for them? One of the things that I found quite shocking when I went to visit a zoo that I shan't name was that the bear was rocking backwards and forwards quite a lot. And when I researched that, I found that that was to do with mental illness. Imagine as a human, if you have something such as depression, for example, there are so many different things that can be done for us. And one of the reasons is that we can communicate that with people, and we can ask for help. And I really thought about how that bear can't actually ask for help. So if you don't have a specialist who knows the behaviour of the bear, for example, how on earth can they treat these animals properly? So as you can see, my one sentence point of zoos are not good places has turned into a really in-depth discussion. What I would consider doing now is taking something that you have written down and turning that into a bigger point. So the suggested order of things: begin with a general overview of the topic. So, for example, I may begin with the animal kingdom has long been one that humans have infiltrated, whether that be through, and then I would go into just talking about the animal kingdom in general. Then I introduced my argument with my first discussion point, which was zoos. So one of the primary issues animals face because of humans is captivity. Notice how I'm taking what I was saying about animals in the first instance and bringing it into the second point. We lock them up, we do such and such. Now, you know from my planning that I'm going to talk about Tiger King and my own personal visit to a zoo. So then what I need to think about is when I'm going into my next point, how I can link them together. My next point is about the meat and dairy industry. So how can I bring those together because they're so far apart? So I might just say something like, and it's not just the Tiger Kings of this world that are a threat, it's also those who eat meat. And then I can go into my next point. So it's just taking little parts and making sure that everything flows and links together. So then I have to do the same with discussion point 3, which of course in my case was about pets. So if we are to insist on having domestic animals, then stop eating them and have pets instead. I'm making the assumption here that in my previous point I would have talked about keeping animals but eating them and not treating them very nicely. So then that kind of links really nicely into my pets argument. And then I really want to link back in some way. So we need to strive for a less oppressive relationship with the animal kingdom, because if not, and then I can do a little bit more, but you'll notice there that I used the phrase animal kingdom so that I can nicely tie a little bow around my argument. I really hope that this helps with you and your planning and your structuring of your answer.